Hey everybody, welcome to my rabbit hole. This is where it all happens. Here I am at the Sugar Camp Hollow Studios, just outside of Nashville, and this is where we put together the collection, the IK Multimedia Brown Sound 78-79 collection. So it's been a great journey. It's taken a long time, and as I mentioned in my little previous teaser video, that I was going to come out and kind of go deep into this and kind of show you what we were thinking, why we did it, the decisions that we made, and how the whole collection works and how it works in my mind and how it's laid out. So I've gotten a lot of questions to start about the guitars, or the pickups specifically. So this one, most of you that have watched my other Brown Sound videos are pretty familiar with it. This is one of my creations. The pickup in here is a Gibson 57 Classic, and it's a neck position pickup. So it's a low wind. It's a 7.625K. And I have put a short A5 magnet in it. Now, the reason I did that is if we believe the story about the original pickup for this guitar, for the real guitar, when Ed pulled it out of the 61 ES335, that would have been the spec for the PAF that was in the guitar. It would have been somewhere between a 7.5K to an 8K, and 8K would have been really a hot pickup back then. So I figured 7.625K was a pretty good compromise, and that's kind of where most of them from that era fell in. And then 250K pot. Oh, and all the PAFs, Gibson standardized in late 60 and into 61. They standardized that all magnets would be short A5s through the P90s, through the humbuckers. So that's why it would have had a short A5. So that's why I did that. So it's a relatively low output pickup. And the captures, the tone models are designed with these pickups. As close to what, everything is speculation and everything because nobody really knows. Ed's no longer with us, and Don Landee probably doesn't remember and probably didn't know everything about Ed's rig. So again, this is speculation, but you got to use your ears. You got to trust your ears. And I did meticulous amounts of tests. I made well over 1,000 recordings of moving a microphone, tweaking this, tweaking that, changing this, changing that, and listening back and listening again, and then fine tuning. So that's where my decisions came from, was trial and error. And that's why this took me over a year to get it completed, because there was a ton of recordings and a ton of experimentation and all kinds of stuff along the way. So that's this guitar. The Destroyer. Most of you know this one too. This is my Greco Destroyer, which is the same as the Ibanez. It was made in the mid to late 70s at the Fujigen factory in Japan. Some people call these the lawsuit guitars. The only difference between the Ibanez and the Greco were the pickups that they came with. Maxon made the U1000 and the U2000 pickups for the Grecos, which was more of a PAF clone. It was a lower output pickup with A5s and A2 magnets. The Super 70, which is what the Ibanez came with, was the A8 magnet. And I've known about the Super 70 pickup for years and years and years. So when I first bought this guitar, I've got a bucket full of pickups, and I grabbed one of my better Super 70s and I put it in this guitar right away. So this guitar's got the Super 70 pickup in it. These two pots are original, but the bridge pot wore out, the bridge pickup pot. So they're 500Ks, and the tone pot is wired. It makes a slight bit of difference, but that's also a 500K pot. Okay, so those are the guitars, and I chose them because that's what was used on that first album, especially. The second album, it was mostly just the black and white striped guitar. All right, as far as dummy loads, EQs, slaving, all of that stuff, I don't believe. These guys had no money. They didn't have the ability to go out and do this. The world was different back then. You didn't get dummy here. Trust me, I have it all. Here's a load resistor. All right, and I've got the Boss GE10. I've got 3 of these, I think. I've got the MXR, the original blue 6-band. I've got the reissue, the black one with the foot button, the push button on it. So I've got all that stuff. I've tried every load, reactive load, static dummy load, L-pad dummy loads, speaker emulation, all of that stuff. Master volumes, I'm not a fan. They affect the amp, so I didn't use any of that stuff. And I don't believe any of that stuff was used. So my rule here was, if I start to get too out there in my theories, if it's not simple, then I'm missing the point. I'm missing what really happened, because I believe that, again, they had no money. They couldn't experiment like this. The experiments that they did were done with minimal gear, minimal equipment. So that's the way this was done. There's none of that stuff. There's no push in the front end of the amp. There's nothing. There's no EQ on the front end of the amp. There's none of that stuff going on for these captures and for this collection. There's no dummy loads. There's no master volumes. The amp is wide open with a variac. Period. The signal chain. There's been some question on the internet. The guys that are doing the demos now, which I think are great. I love it, and I thank you for that. There's been a couple of statements about the pedals, the phaser, and I've seen some questions in the forums, in the comments on those videos. So the pedals were on, the phase shifter was on, or was it off, no, the pedals were not on, and the Echoplex was not on. But what people maybe don't know anymore, or it's only us old guys that kind of remember this, I think. There was no such thing as true bypass back then. Pedals all came with a buffer in them, and the buffer served a purpose to help maintain the signal, help maintain signal loss from cable runs and multiple connections going in and out of pedals. So they built in a little buffer, like a little tiny signal amplifier, that would help push the signal along the way so you wouldn't lose it through cable runs and that sort of thing. That's always on. That buffer is part of that pedal, and those buffers color the sound. So that's why in doing these captures, I made sure I was using the identical signal chain. So those buffers were in the signal in the signal chain when they recorded those albums. When the original albums were recorded at Sunset Sound, those pedals were on the floor. Those pedals were wired because he was using those pedals. The Echoplex was there, so the signal was going through the Echoplex, and that preamp is famous for coloring the sound. So this is, again, before the days of true bypass, all that sort of thing. So the buffers are an integral part of the sound. The cable I used, Belden wire. That was the premier wire back then. Everybody used Belden wire. The Megamis, the Canaries, the Monster cable, all that stuff didn't exist. So, and my feeling on that cabling is that it's great stuff, but for a guitar cable, it might make your amp too bright because they're such low capacitance, they're such high quality. We didn't have that back in the 70s. That stuff wasn't around. So again, period correct cable and long lengths of it too, because that's what we all did back then to try to take the harshness out of the amplifier. So that's included in the captures. And from there, it just goes into the amp and into the multiple cabinets. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you into, do the screenshot, do the screen view of what was going on and how it's all laid out and how I look at it. All right, so here we are in Logic. Here's my channel strip, and I've got Tonex inserted as a plug-in, and here it is. So you can go through and you can set your parameters. You can use the delay, the built-in delay here if you want. You don't have to. You've got, modulation, reverb, the compressor, noise gate, all that stuff. These are a little hissy because the real amp is a little bit hissy, and I didn't want to lose anything by using a noise gate. So you can decide if you want to do that or not. So when you're using Tonex, and I mentioned earlier that when I set these captures up to a baseline, I had all of the controls at noon, straight up noon. So you've got all kinds of adjustment here. The pickups that I'm using for the baseline that are period correct, accurate for what we all kind of believe Ed used on those first few albums, first couple albums anyway. They're fairly low output pickups, and they're not like today's pickup. They're not like the EVH Frankenstein or the JB or Super Distortion. If you have those pickups in your guitar, they're usually a little bit darker. They're a little bit more gain, so don't be afraid to pull the gain back a little bit if you want to match the album tones, the Van Halen 1, Van Halen 2 album tones, with your guitar that has a hotter pickup in it. You might need to cut a little bass out of it. You might need to bump the treble a little bit. But don't be afraid to do that, because that's how we design this collection, because we know not everybody's going to have the vintage gear, the same stuff. You have your guitars, you have your favorite guitars. We want this to be usable for everybody. So don't be afraid to adjust that. Go in and do that. Pick the model, the tone model that fits best with what your guitar is, and pick the speaker cabinet that fits best with your guitar. There's plenty of people that are going to go through the whole Tonex thing. I'm just trying to show you what I was thinking and how I designed these captures. When I did those videos on YouTube in the past 4 weeks, I'm just putting it out there. I'm just showing everybody what Tonex is capable of without telling them it's Tonex. So when I recorded those YouTube videos from the past 3 weeks, here's the setup that I used. As you know, Van Halen those early records were panned to the left. I don't do a full hard pan, but right here, I'm pretty far over. This is the Tonex channel strip. And then I sent it to an effects bus, which has the IK Multimedia Sunset Sound reverb plugin. For Van Halen 2, you have to use, and if you want to be authentic, you have to go to a plate reverb. And it's more than likely, I don't think it's the Echo plate, which is plate 1. I believe it's the EMT 140. Because when they recorded Van Halen 2, they tracked it at Sunset Sound, but they didn't mix it at Sunset Sound. They mixed it at Westlake. And Westlake doesn't have Sunset Sound's chambers, but Westlake had an EMT plate reverb. So that's another reason that Van Halen 1 and Van Halen 2 sound slightly different, because the echo chambers aren't there, and they had a sound, a unique sound. So what I did is I just kept these same settings between the reverb and the chamber, but then I just adjusted the level, the channel strip level, of how much of the reverb I was sending to the stereo output, the stereo bus on Logic. Don't pay any attention to this H910. That's a harmonizer. I'm not using it all on those videos. That's for upcoming stuff. So that's just in there because I've been experimenting. As this collection has been out for a day or two, I've had some comments and people ask me, I've seen some of the video demos, they click through everything, and there's some radically different sounding tone models. So here's what happened. It was decided that we should name these something other. These were my original names for me to keep track of what I was doing and what it's supposed to achieve. These are the new names. There's a lot of people that are going to play this collection that will look at my original names and not understand any of that. And then there are the Van Halen nuts, the geeks like me, that are so far down the rabbit hole, they understand exactly what my original names mean. I think we're going to probably end up making this available as like a download, a PDF download. But you can kind of see the method to my madness. And so if these were numbered in order, we color-coded them so that they could group them for the new names. On the 78 part of the collection, each speaker cabinet has a 78-volt capture that has post-EQing. So it's got all the album sound bells and whistles on it to tailor that, to make the album sound. And then it's got an 89-volt doing the same thing. And it'll tell you what the speaker is, the speaker cabinet that's being used. I have some alternate things in here. That's a slight EQ changer. In this case, it's a tape machine running slower than normal, 7 inches per second, 7 IPS. That just darkens and thickens the sound a little bit. I've got some in here that are also, so you'll still see, all right, so it's still a 78 volt, it's still a 25 watt, it's still on the blackbacks, but I gave you a hot option. That means I goosed the analog console channel gain slightly, just like they would have done in the studio back then, to get a little bit more grit out of the console itself. That's what I'm doing here with the hot. And we're still on the blackbacks. Notice we're all still on the blackbacks. You're getting a raw version of it, so there's none of that post EQ. There's none of that studio magic happening to the capture. That's just what the microphones sound on the cabinet. And then you've got room versions, and the room versions, see, I'm still on blackbacks. These are all blackback captures. So you've got a room version then. So that's a large condenser microphone that's back from the cabinet a little bit. And so you could, if you wanted to, you could get in your DAW and you could take a little bit of that room capture because it's dark, it doesn't have much high end, and you'd mix that way in the background. And then maybe you might want to put a little bit of the raw in there, maybe, or maybe you just want to mix. Or if you wanted to put the raw in there and you wanted to do your own EQ on it, because essentially what you've got is a really great sounding Plexi Marshall that doesn't have the album touches on it. So that's what the raws were for, and that's what the rooms were for. And sometimes that's hard to tell with the new names. We did that for every speaker cabinet. See here, the JBL Greenback. And we have different alternates because the JBLs can get really harsh or they can get really mid-rangey. So there's a bunch of different alternates of the JBLs in there. But again, you see the raw, you see the room. Here are the 25 watt greenbacks, 25 watt greenbacks, 20 watt greenbacks. And I stopped doing some of the room ones. I always kept up on the raw, but I stopped doing some of the room because it was getting redundant. You can't really hear the difference between the speaker cabinets from when you're 4 or 5 feet back with a large condenser microphone. So you didn't really hear that. It was way too subtle to include in it, so we didn't do that. And then when you get into the 79 version, that's when I'm only using the blackbacks and the greenbacks. But you can tell all this with this list. So this is what I was thinking. And then you've got the Vega, you've got it with no Vega, you've got the room. Here's with no Vega wireless. Then you've got Vega wireless with greenbacks, and you've got a low gain Vega wireless. And the low gain was done by turning down the output of the receiver. So because Van Halen 2 has got that little bit cleaner sound. And sometimes it almost sounds Telecaster like or single coil like, but it's warm. It's still got that big warmth. So anyway, that's the idea behind all that. We can make this available. That's not going to be a big deal. Just let us know if you want it, and I'll figure out a way to get it to you, or we'll put it on we'll do something with it. We're still talking about the best way to handle that, but I am seeing it coming up in the chats and that sort of thing. That's pretty much it for this side of it. So I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, for the 79 signal chain for Van Halen 2. There is controversy already erupting online concerning the Vega wireless and whether or not it was used in the studio. All right. Here's what I think. Well, here's what I surmise. And again, in 1979, when those guys were on tour for their first world tour, and they got to the song "Outta Love Again," and they did the beginning, that springy noise with all the hiss at the beginning on the album too. Do you know how he created that sound live? As I was watching it, as Roth would say, live in front of your naked, steaming eyes, he was hitting the Schaefer wireless pack, and that was causing that springy. It was creating that noise. That's how he was doing that. Did he have it in the studio? I don't know. But that's the same noise you hear on the album. I haven't seen anybody do it any different, and anybody ever try to figure that out, and I can actually duplicate that noise using the wireless unit. Now, as far as all of the tracks on the album, was it used for the actual tracks on the album? Here's what I'll say about it. And I love my buddy Alan Garber dearly. I really do. He's such a fellow geek in all of this stuff, and he's saying absolutely not, didn't happen. I will never make a statement like that. I will never do an absolute, because again, there's nobody around that really even knows. Ed probably didn't remember necessarily. Don Landee probably doesn't remember. So bottom line, again, use your ears. It's, as they say, trust and verify. So when I was going through and testing all of these sounds and recording and how the guitar feels in your hand and everything like that, the Schaefer Vega imparts a certain tone that a super lead, in my opinion, I can't get it out of the super lead. And that tone, to me, on some cuts on Van Halen 2 exists. And that's why I included it. I know there's a ton of controversy, and I know that, but I give you can play the same amp setup, the same everything without the Schaefer Vega. So I'm leaving it up to you guys to decide. There's some compelling evidence either way, and like I said, I won't make a definite statement. I've always said what I do is complete speculation. So. But it's based on certain things, and I always trust my ears, and I trust how the guitar feels, and I trust how the amplifiers work and sound, and how microphones hear them, because I've recorded them for years. So, Diddy or Dindy, I don't know. You decide. That's why it's included in the setup or in the collection. So have fun with it. There's no need to fight about it. This is one of those things that we're never going to know any of this stuff for sure. So that's where I'm going to leave the whole Schaefer Vega thing. Okay, let's talk about the amplifier a little bit. So the amp is my orange Tonex colored, essentially it's a ground up build of a 68 Super Lead. Now, if you want to go way down the rabbit hole, all of those details are on the IK Multimedia Brown Sound 7879 website for that. It gives the whole breakdown on the amplifier. But just to say, it's got all of the period correct components in it. It's got the Haybor iron in it, so you've got the mains transformer and the output transformer are period correct or diagonal clones. It's got the proper filtering for the era, and it's got the mods, the agreed upon mods that everybody that's in this rabbit hole kind of knows what was in Ed's amp, and that's the 50K mid pot, the fat cap mod on V2, which gives you, for those that don't know what the fat cap mod does, it's just kind of a low mid bump in tone that gives you a little bit more gain down there, a little bit more push in the kind of where the guitar lives in that frequency response in the lower mids. So it gives you that push. And then the amp has also got the 100K negative feedback resistor that is going to the 4 ohm tap, which is a pretty aggressive negative feedback setup, which makes the amp a little bit more hairy, and it's not quite the standard spec for a that you would see in a 68 Super Lead. So was it a happy accident that happened to Ed's amp? Did somebody go there in there and modify it at some point? The jury's kind of out on that. I don't think there's ever been a consensus on that. And you've had a lot of guys, a lot of really well-known, knowledgeable guys looking at it with Dave Friedman, John Sir, I think Fryette. There's a few that have been in the amp, not back when the amp was the period that we're talking about, but they had been in the amp later, and they said it's stock. I mean, it's mostly stock, other than the things that we had just mentioned. So, having said all that, and I kind of touched on it earlier, talking about well, where does all that gain come from? And because that's not what a Marshall Plexi sounds like. That's not. I mean, they get pretty dirty, they get pretty raunchy, but they also get kind of flubby, and they get they can get squished, way squishy in an ugly way when you turn everything up. So what I used to do many years ago when I was a young guy and I was fighting the same problems that Ed was fighting, I'm sure, playing in the clubs with these 4-hole Marshalls, these Super Leads, 100 watters. I mean, they're loud. That's just what it is. And so all we ever did back in the 70s and 80s and 90s is try to figure out how to quiet these amps up, because we didn't have attenuators and we didn't have that sort of stuff back then. It was really not common. Dummy loads and all that stuff. It just wasn't a thing back then. So I would just look at this thing, and I'm just a kid and I don't understand the difference between and how these things operate. And you kind of make the correlation. You say, okay, there's 4 big fat tubes. Those are called the output tubes. What if I pull some tubes to quiet the amp down? I mean, we all did it back then. And you're normally, when you do that, and it's a common practice, but normally when you do that, you're supposed to pull the outside pair of output tubes or the inside pair of output tubes, because the amp is what's called a push-pull circuit. You've got the signal coming. I mean, I look at it as a sine wave, and the amp guys can correct me on this, but I look at it as the sine wave. You got the top of the sine wave and you got the bottom of the sine wave. So you need that. That's the push and the pull, and the push and the pull as the signal is coming out of the output transformer, 2 sides. If you pull, which is what I ended up doing, and this all came to me kind of after it did. It came to me after watching a Tone Talk episode, Dave Friedman and Mark Uzansky, and they had Ozzy Hassan on as a guest, and he's Three Monkeys Solderless, and he's got some. I mean, he's really got some cool stuff. He's a creative thinker. And he's in the whole dummy load rabbit hole. So I disagree with him on that. But he made a comment on that episode. He said, that amp on Van Halen 1, it sounds like it's broken. And you think about it, and it does sound like it's broken, because that's not what Plexis sound like. That's not what Marshall Super Leads sound like. And so that got to me thinking, and what I used to do as a young guy playing in clubs and stuff and playing small venues, is we'd pull those tubes. And I remember playing dates with 1 tube in the amp. And I had a tech chew me out and say, you can't do that. You're going to wreck the amplifier. And quit using that Variac. You're going to wreck the amplifier. Well, God, that was 35, 40 years ago. And so I haven't wrecked an amp yet from a Variac or pulling tubes. But I believe that you probably are stressing some components within the amp by running it that way. So anyway, what I did on this collection and this discovery I made, I had mentioned that I've been tracked thousands of tracks and tests and doing these things, and I could never get that distortion character right. So when I thought about what they said on Tone Talk, and when I thought about what I did as a kid, I pulled 2 of the tubes, but I didn't pull the outside or the inside. I pulled valves 4 and 5, which they're numbered in the amplifier that's starting with the preamp tubes. They're 1, 2, 3. Those are the 3 preamp tubes. And you got 4, 5, 6, 7 are the output tubes. So I pulled 4 and 5. So now I cut off one side of the sine wave. I cut off the push-pull. I'm only now a pull, if any of that makes sense. So as soon as I did that, it was immediate. I knew that was the thing. Just from the tone, the way the amp behaved, everything came into focus, and that solved my whole I can't get the gain, that distortion character correct. So as soon as I did that, I was convinced. And it also had occurred to me that I had heard this quote, this had been bouncing around, that Ed had supposedly said to, I think it was to Ted Templeman, and I've heard it, I may have read it, I can't find it, I looked for it, I wish I could find it to verify. But the quote went something like, in saying to Ted Templeman, I know what tubes to pull to make the amp sound meaner. And sure enough, that's what it does. It makes the amp sound hairier, and it's operating way out of spec. So, as I talked about earlier, the guys had no money. They didn't do all this stuff. This slaving thing, yeah, I'm sure they experimented with things like that. But if you can just pull 2 tubes, plug your guitar straight into it, turn it down with the Variac, that's the easiest solution, right? And so that's the direction I went, and that, like I said, that's what got me to it. Now, as far as the speaker cabinets go, there's a reason we included all of them, because nobody really knows. It's most believe that his main studio cabinet for the first 4 albums, or for the first 3 albums, at least, was a 68 basket weave cabinet. And that probably would have been loaded either with 25 watt greenbacks or 20 watt greenbacks. So we don't know that for sure. So I gave you both. So I gave you a 20 watt greenback option. We gave you a 25 watt greenback option. We gave you the blackback, 25 watt blackback option. And of course we gave you the highly disputed, controversial, is there not, the use of a JBL D120. Are we hearing a JBL D120? So we gave you that one too. So you've got the cabinet it's the mixed cabinet. It's got the JBL D120s up top, and then it's got the 25 watt greenbacks down below. So every cabinet was mic'd with 2 microphones, 2 SM57s, and one closer to the dust cap on the speaker and one closer to the suspension ring. So you got a bright sound and you got a dark sound, and then we blended those within the capture. You know, there were some hard, fast rules. Once I set the baseline that you would, to keep the whole to keep the collection consistent throughout the cabinet changes. But there were some slight EQ changes, because I wanted the cabinets to have a different character, and I wanted the greenbacks versus the blackbacks versus the JBLs. I wanted them all to shine in the 20 watt greenbacks. I wanted them all to shine and show what their difference is, but I did have to make some post EQ adjustments. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of how the whole collection works on the front end of it. Now we'll dig in a little bit to the post-production side of things, and I touched on it with the 2 microphones. I tried to keep this as analog as completely possible. I got my console here behind me, my old analog console. I tried to do this like it would have happened for any day when you were recording on 2-inch 24-track or 2-inch 16-track tape. So the microphones come into the analog console. Then they have to, because I'm not using 2-inch tape, I'm not using half-inch tape or anything like that. So then they go into Logic. The output of the analog board goes into Logic, and I used along the way. I used a couple of plugins. I used some tape emulation, so I was using a Studer A800, the 24-track. I put that on the guitar tracks coming in, just like they would have. They would have recorded those to 24-track. But then coming off the 24-track, because they would have then, once they recorded all the tracks, they would have then remixed the album, and they would have mixed it down to 2-track. So then I sent it out of Logic, back into the console, back through channel strips in the console, as if I'm doing a mix down on it. And then I sent it back into Logic, and then used a 2-track tape emulation. So I was trying to keep this as analog as possible, and the only real plugins that I used were I did use some 1176 compressors. I used a hardware compressor coming in as an insert on the channels, on the analog channels, and I used a little bit of API in the remix API in Logic, API channel strips. But other than that, it's as analog as I could get it without using actual mechanical tape decks. So that's pretty much the entire capture process. It's what was used, and I hope it helps you think more about where I was thinking and what I was trying to achieve on this collection. So if you have any questions, put it in the comments and everything below. Let me know. I try to answer a lot of these things. You can use my affiliate link to go to IK Multimedia if you want to purchase the collection. I'd appreciate it. You know, I'd work for free otherwise. So anyway, it's been a pleasure. It's been quite a thing. Stay tuned. We've got more of these coming out. We're going to do, next up is Women and Children First and Fair Warning. I'm currently working on that. And then from there, we're going to go diver down 1984. And it's not going to be months. It's going to be weeks. Okay, so those collections are going to be coming out as soon as I can get them done, and trust me, they're putting the pressure on me. So that's what I'm going to be doing for the next few weeks. Thank you for watching. Thank you for purchasing. I think it's cool. I love it. Talk soon.